From the Oregon State University Extension Service, this is Pollination, a podcast that tells the stories of researchers, land managers, and concerned citizens making bold strides to improve the health of pollinators. I'm your host, Dr. Adoni Melithopoulos, Assistant Professor in Pollinator Health in the Department of Horticulture. Last week, we had a really great episode with Bonnie Schaffner talking about how to do effective education and outreach with people who don't know anything about bees. And I thought this was a great opportunity to catch up with another real great educator here in Oregon, August Jackson. Now, August works as an interpretation coordinator at the Mount Pisgah Arboretum, where he's helping to develop the Arboretum's interpretive exhibits and adult educational programs. Now, he's been studying and photographing bees for only about 5 years, but he has a real great eye for it. He's a real talent. He can really identify bees. He has a great ability to frame bees up in pictures, and he's taken this towards education. He's educated a lot of people on bee biodiversity in the state through some of the programs that he runs, both at the Arboretum but also at the Siskiyou Field Institute. And this week he was at the bee school here at Oregon State University. In this episode, I want to talk to him about how to integrate all those things together, and he's done so beautifully in this brand new book he's offering for free online, The Bees of the Willamette Valley, A Comprehensive Guide to Genera. So we're going to talk a little bit about how the book is structured, how people who are just beginning start to learn about bees and some of the diversity of bees, and then we're going to go into this really fascinating discussion about how to photograph bees. It's a really great episode. I'm so excited to finally be able to bring August onto the show. I hope you enjoy this episode. Okay, I am very excited to be sitting across from August. Welcome to Pollination.
Thank you, Adoni. It's awesome to be here.
We have an occasion. You're an instructor here at Bee School, and you've also done a lot of education at Siskiyou Field Institute and elsewhere, as well as in your current position. Mm-hmm. I can never say the name of the Arboretum.
Mount Pisgah Arboretum, yeah.
Outside of Eugene. So you've done a lot of bee education, and you've come out with a new book. And so I want to I've been wanting to talk to you about just in terms of like your understanding of the bees of this region, but there's so much to talk about. But I did want to focus today on talking about the book that you developed. Where did the idea for this guide come from? So it's the guide to... It's
a guide to the bees of the Willamette Valley.
Okay, for those that...
With a focus on genera.
Okay, so people who are not from Oregon, this is sort of the part from Portland down to Eugene. It's this valley. Okay.
Right.
So where did this idea even come from?
So honestly, it just came to me kind of last fall when usually my busy season's kind of over at work. And, there's no field season anymore. All the bees are gone. And, I was just kind of thinking about some projects I wanted to do. And it just sort of developed, and I was like, that's a crazy idea. And then I started laying out a plan for it, and I figured, okay, I can actually do this. I can actually probably put this together in 3 or 4 months.
That's insane. I just want to mark this for it's a really well put together. It took you 3 to 4 months.
Yeah.
That's crazy. It's all laid out. It looks, wow. Okay.
While working 40 plus hours a week still.
That is crazy. Okay, keep going.
So, and part of the inspiration for it was actually being up at the first session of Bee School last July, and working with the key the can pollen key that I think came out of the Packer lab. I haven't been able to track down exactly who did it, but, it was seeing people work through this key during Bee School and seeing what they struggled with. And so part of what I did was, it was really inspired by that key, taking the basics of that key, and filtering it down for our area and then simplifying it more, in terms of some of the terminology used, seeing, what characters I could, that were, confounding people that I could just get rid of. And then, seeing if I could improve on the photographs. In some instances, I'm not sure I did. That can be a little challenging with some of the tiny characteristics, but that was kind of the goal. And I was like, okay, if I'm going to make a key, then I might as well have a section on each genus that gives people a little more info and maybe some info on species in that genus they can find in the valley. So that's kind of how it came together.
Wow. Okay, so let's back up just one sec, because I think what the guide really shows is a sensitivity to learners. So tell me a little bit about your, the experience. When you there's so many people really interested in pollinators and want to get to know more than just bumblebee and honeybee. And so when people, what's the beginner's experience when they're confronting, these hundreds of species of bees?
I think it's daunting. And I can say for myself that it's daunting. I taught myself, I've never taken an entomology course. I taught myself, I guess, starting 6 or 7 years ago. Always been interested in botany, and I just started to pay attention to what I saw on flowers. And so pollinating flies and bees both captured my interest. I started looking around to figure, what kind of material I could find on them, and found that I was hitting immediate roadblocks. And there's more information out now. There probably was back then too. I just didn't know how and where to look for it. So I guess part of what I had in mind was what would have been really helpful for me at that point, where I was like, okay, this is cool. I want to know more. And yeah, so that was really, I had myself in mind. And I had, a lot of people that are in classes that I teach or help out in mind as well.
Where do people get stuck? So when they, you mentioned, looking at previous key, for example, the Campong key, and just thinking about I can see a learner's perspective to this in a way forward. He said one of the things was make sure, when you deal with, the bees of North and Central America, you got all these couplets that don't make any sense. So you strip those out to begin with. So you've got a species list you're thinking about. Right.
Yeah. There are a lot of ones that throw people off, and a lot of it is just when a key asks you to look at a set of characters that your mind has never considered.
Yeah.
So, wing veins and how curved they are. And you're supposed to say something is strongly curved versus not strongly curved, and you've never seen either before.
Yeah.
So how does that work? And that's something you can't really get around. But I think you can start to break through that a bit if you start to change the way you're phrasing things, and present photos that illustrate that. That you can compare that with. But that's still hard. In the classes I taught, using this key for the first time back in June, people, had difficulty with that. And, both days, it was like, but by the end of it, people were they had seen enough bees, they'd gone through it enough times that they had that reference that, oh, okay, that means strongly curved, that's less strongly curved. Repetition's important, and good reference images are really important.
I was thinking about how you described your own passage, and it started with kind of not, probably microscopes were not the first place you turned. You were thinking...
Not at all.
Yeah, you were thinking about, you had an interest in seeing the connection between pollinators and plants.
Right.
And the book starts off with a kind of, it understands that learning step, and you have, describe how you've sort of, built the book with that as a starting point.
Yeah. There's an introduction that kind of goes into that a bit, where, the audience for this book was ideally anyone with an interest, including people who are, gardeners who want to know what's in their garden. And of course, that's a very broad audience, from the people who want to really dig into bees versus those who are just kind of curious and would like to know more about what they're seeing in their garden. And I try to do both, and I don't know how well both audiences were served, but there's a key at the beginning that just sort of helps people sort things into artificial groups, and it's just 5 couplets, and it's really just based on some characteristics that you could see in a handful of cell phone photos of a bee that's visiting parsley flowers in your backyard, for example. And then that narrows it down to a few options that you can look at in the back. and try to differentiate between, and maybe, every several times you can actually come to a point where you feel like you're probably IDing that bee correctly to genus.
So it gets you kind of a very coarse read on bee biodiversity.
Yeah.
Why don't walk us through what those 5 couplets are, if you can, without it in front of you.
Yeah. So it's actually just looking at hairiness, the level of hairiness, how metallic something is, if it has pale markings on its integument, rather than just pale hair bands or something like that. I think size is in there too to some degree.
Yeah.
And that can narrow things down pretty quickly with the bees that you see in your backyard. Your Serratinas and Dialictus are
they're never
quite a
going
bit
to be big.
smaller than everything else you're encountering. So I think those are the main kind of groupings, and then it sends you off from there.
No, those are great. Those are all really, especially if you're in a constrained area and you're not having to consider bees from anywhere else, that can get you pretty close to, some good guesses.
Right. It can help you with some guesses. Yeah.
Okay, that's great. Let's take a quick break, and I want to come back and ask you a little bit more about some of the cool bees in Oregon that you've come across. All right. Okay, we're back. So we'll make our way to bees, but the one thing I did forget to mention, I remember the first thing is I follow you on Instagram, and you have some of the most stunning bee pictures I've ever seen.
Thank you.
And you also have like a Flickr page?
No.
It's all on Instagram.
Yeah, right now it is, yeah.
Yeah, it's on Instagram. And the book also I think lots of people are interested in bee photography. Just kind of walk us through some of the basics of how do you take a good bee picture?
Yeah.
They're so fast.
They're fast. They can be very fast. Yeah, so you wait for a rainy day, and that's all. That's the only time you take photos of bees. No, I mean, it's super fun and challenging, and I really enjoy it. There are a lot of kind of macro photographers that focus on insects that take pictures primarily of things that sit pretty still. I enjoy the challenge of chasing after bees, and that was how I began learning bees. I learned bees through my camera lens because I didn't have a microscope. This is after college, so I didn't have access to a microscope really. I could have if I had really asked around. But I learned bees through my camera, and that was really useful. So I was just teaching myself in the field. So you can use all kinds of different cameras. I think it's particularly handy to have a macro lens, and that's really what took me to the next level. But you can get pretty good camera, pretty good macro lens for a reasonable price these days, and now that everything's digital, you can just snap hundreds of bad photos on your way to getting some good ones. And that's really what it is when you're taking pictures of bees. I'll go out on a week camping trip, and I'll snap 2,000 photos, and I'll come back and have 10 to 15 that I like.
Really?
And well, actually, okay, that's not entirely fair because I'll have more than that, but I'll only choose 10 or 15 of them. Okay. So maybe 100 that I like.
So the one thing that people run into is depth of field. Really, being able to getting the abdomen in focus, but not the head can be. How do you? Is that just chance, or is there a strategy to sort of lining them up?
Yeah, I use flash, so that helps a lot. So I can really narrow down my aperture so that I'm shooting at. This is maybe too technical, but f9 to 13. So it's a really narrow aperture, greater depth of field, and the flash is key for that. So that's kind of my number one friend. That I ran out of flash batteries one time and just decided, okay, I'm gonna for fun try to shoot without a flash, and I'll never do that again. So that's really a key for me. And then, yeah, positioning myself to try to get, the kind of photo that I want. And I like to get as much data in the picture as I can, as well as have it be a nice looking picture, because I'm really, interested in it being usable as a potential teaching tool to help identify things. That's important to me.
Right. Yeah. Okay. And I guess there's more details. Like I immediately want to ask, like, the flashes, like, God, yeah, and the battery's running out. I was just like, man, you go up on these long hikes in the middle of nowhere and carrying all this flash equipment. And anyways, this is all in the book. One can.
Yeah, there's info in the book. Yeah.
Okay. Yep. But what about my question about batteries running out and all that? Like, how does that work?
I make sure I use better batteries now.
Yeah.
Actually, rechargeables that work and last for a very long time, and I bring spares.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's fairly simple.
Okay, so and I also just want to, I really like the idea of the kind of connection with the first part of the interview. Just thinking about being an educator and taking pictures that sort of help people along that route of that's really fantastic. Mm-hmm. Okay, so tell us a little bit about some of the areas in Oregon. You've been around the state a lot, and follow you on Instagram, and you got these great expeditions. Tell us a little bit about some of your favorite areas in Oregon for collecting and taking pictures.
Yeah. So the Willamette Valley actually has a pretty great bee diversity. So one of my favorite spots is honestly just in the spring, I go outside my office, Mount Pisgah Arboretum, and take a walk during lunch. And I bring my camera with me, and sometimes a net. And that's one of my favorite spots. There's a very high diversity of bees there that kind of corresponds with the peak floral diversity in mid to late April and early May. So that's an awesome spot. Southern Oregon is pretty great.
And just backing up, so in that time of the year, this is mostly shrubs. This is Oregon grape and
Oregon
willows.
Grape would be a little earlier than that. This would be when you get the camas blooms and buttercups, and I mean when practically everything in the valley blooms.
Yeah,
you do still have some Oregon Grape blooming. Yeah, and the willows too often are hanging on still.
Is there a plant in the spring that you sort of reliably, I'm going to find something cool on it?
Camas is interesting. It attracts a lot of different Andrena mining bees. Mm-hmm. Oregon grape is kind of a cornucopia plant, so it'll bring in a lot of really interesting flies, mining bees, Eucera. A plant that I really love is our first bloomer, and that's osoberry or Indian plum. Mm-hmm. And that's a really fascinating plant to me because it blooms generally, on average, in mid-February. Mm-hmm. When our temperatures are often too cold for bees. So it's pollinated a lot by some pretty fascinating flies. And then you do get a rush of bees on the warm days, mining bees and Eucera. And it's just this really interesting group of early spring pollinating fauna that's out for 4 weeks and is pretty unique. So that's a plant I like.
Fantastic. Okay, so we're headed to Southern Oregon.
Yeah, Southern Oregon's great. In the Siskiyous, the plant diversity there is very high with a lot of endemics. So you get some interesting bees. I don't get to spend enough time down there. Honestly, it's a really awesome place.
But you teach a bee course down there every year at the Siskiyou Field Institute.
I've been doing a course, at the Siskiyou Field Institute. So I don't get a lot of time.
No, I guess you're teaching. Yeah. If you take the course, you'll see some cool bees.
Yeah. But there's cool stuff down there for sure.
And what's kind of blooming, and what time of year do you like going down there? Like May
through June is pretty good. April too. There's a long bloom season there, and pretty spectacular diversity. And again, a large number of endemic plant species, which should house also some really interesting bees that probably are only in that section of this state, but that remains to be seen.
Any other spots on the other side of the Cascades?
Yeah, I mean, all of Eastern Oregon's great, but I love Steens Mountain and the Alvord Desert area. The diversity there is phenomenal. It's
just drop the mic.
And the abundance is crazy too.
Yeah.
Like, I set down my cup of coffee and I have female osmia swimming in it as I try to take another sip. I woke up in my tent one morning and I had a female Hoplites fulgida next to me on my pillow. Wow. I tried to get her out of the tent before my partner noticed. So
you could the Big Rock Candy Mountain song, you could sort of adapt this to the Steens, and just instead of anyways, it has all like whiskey flows out of the
it is pretty spectacular there. So that's a place I love.
And Bloom there is a little bit later. It's starting about now, I imagine.
Right about now, especially this
July,
year, they had a really impressive snowpack. So the Bloom this year should be phenomenal because I think they were 150% of average.
Oh, great.
Yeah. So it should be kind of a super Bloom year up there. So,
are there any other? I'll give you one last. I didn't tell you it was going to be 4, but you're now down to your last one.
Oh man, I don't know. A place I haven't been in a while that I think probably houses some really interesting diversity is the Willamette Mountains.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very unique location floristically, so it has a lot of Rocky Mountain flora there, which suggests to me the possibility of also some Rocky Mountain type fauna. I think that there's a good chance for some interesting bumblebees there.
Fantastic. Well, those are all really great suggestions. And for those of you who are not in the state, you should come visit us. We've got some great spots to see some really great bees and great plants. Okay, let's take a quick break. We're going to come back. We have this segment where we ask people questions. I'm very interested to know what your answers are. So let's come back after a break. Is.
Yeah.
Okay, we're back. All right, so here's the 3 questions. The first one is there, especially as an author, and we should say the book, we'll have a link to it on the show notes, but you made it freely available, which is great because lots of people are here in Western Oregon are using it. And if you're not in the state, it's just a great, just as like, it may not apply directly to your bees, but it's a really good intro. So we'll have that link on here on the show notes. But coming back to books, like you must have had some books kind of running around in your head as you're writing, or there must have been books that have been. Do you have a recommendation?
I think the Bees in Your Backyard, which came out several years ago, is a really nice introduction for folks to kind of begin to understand bee biodiversity in North America, and it's you can't always use it for identification, but in terms of really getting a feel for the bees, I think it does a phenomenal job in making that information accessible. Beautiful photos throughout. I think it's a really wonderfully done book. And then Bees of the World by Michener is, that guy wrote that book in his 70s, I think.
Uh-huh.
And it's just a phenomenal tome. It's an incredible book.
Well, I was thinking about, it's interesting because both these books are kind of like span, in some sense, not that, you're doing the Bees of the World, but there's 2 things there. Like, I really think Bees in the Backyard did a really great job of kind of de-skilling.
Yeah.
They made it accessible because there's lots of people are interested in yourself. Like, if it's not like you came through a graduate program.
Right.
Like, there's a lot of opportunity for people to be able to do very high quality work, but they do need resources. And I thought that book was really good at just kind of like, no, you can break down this wall and do this.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Which I think, but at the same time, the other end of the extreme is like kind of daunting. Every bee, every kind of the state of knowledge of bee taxonomy, but that there is a kind of straddle both parts of it. Just being able to make it accessible, and then drag people down the rabbit hole with you.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Fantastic. Well, what about tools? Is there a go-to tool? You must have a lot of different tools, but is there something that you find indispensable?
Just my camera. I love my camera, and although lately, been spending a lot of time just in front of a microscope. So both of those are really valuable to me.
Tell us about your camera. What's your camera?
It's a Canon 80D.
Is it 880D or ADD?
Yes. Okay. 80 is in the number and then a D.
Okay, gotcha.
And that's kind of one of their mid-range cameras. And I had a very low-end camera for a while that some of the pictures in the book were taken on. That did a fantastic job too. So you really don't need a high-end camera to do great macro photography work.
And you must have do you have like one go-to macro lens, or do you have a bunch of them?
For the field work, just one that stays on my camera. And that's pretty much all I use. And then for studio work, I have another lens that I use for really high magnification work.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and tell us about your flashes. These.
It's just a Canon Speedlight flash.
So
that I use.
It's just one flash mounted on the top.
It's just one. A lot of people get really into their lighting.
Yeah.
And have multiple flashes and figure out diffusion. And I just am not that kind of person.
Mm-hmm.
I found something that works for me, and it's worked for me for 5 years, and I'll do my damnedest to never change it.
Well, the last question is, and I was wondering if you would permit me to change it up. So the last question was like, do you have a favorite pollinator species?
Mm-hmm.
But I thought it would be a great opportunity to ask you, is there a bee picture that you took that you really cherish? Like, if of all the bee pictures you've taken, is like one or two that sort of like, that was great.
Yeah, I mean, there are definitely some that I really enjoy. There's one I took about four years ago of Nomada cuckoo bee hanging out on a flower, and tucked behind its mid-leg are two triungulin larvae of meloid blister beetle.
Oh my goodness.
And they're all in focus very well. And I really enjoy that photo just because of the drama there.
The larvae are they're laid on the flowers and they wait for a bee to come.
Yeah. And so they're
so it's almost poetic. It's the parasite on the parasite.
Exactly.
Whoa! Yeah. I just got it.
So it's a fun little image.
Oh, fantastic!
Who knows who won that one? If any of them did. So that's one, and then another is. I got a pair of Chelostoma facilii mating at a Phacelia flower last summer, and I thought that was particularly neat just because these are tiny bees. The mating happened super fast, and it was sort of one of those lucky shots where I was trying to photograph the female and the male flew in.
Oh my God, really?
They happened to be in focus. So.
Oh, great. Well, I really recommend people, if you want to see some great bee pictures and you're on Instagram, follow August. They're really great. So we'll put that link up there. But thank you so much for taking time. And also I really recommend the book, even if you're not in the state or if you're outside the Willamette Valley. It's just really worth taking a look, and it's a great read.
Thank you. This was a ton of fun.
Thanks so much for listening. Show notes with information discussed in each episode can be found at pollinationpodcast.oregonstate.edu. We'd also love to hear from you, and there are several ways to connect. For one, you can visit our website to post an episode-specific comment, suggest a future guest or topic, or ask a question that could be featured in a future episode. You can also email us at pollinationpodcast@oregonstate.edu. Finally, you can tweet questions or comments or join our Facebook or Instagram communities. Just look us up at OSU Pollinator Health. If you like the show, consider letting iTunes know by leaving us a review or rating. It makes us more visible, which helps others discover pollination. See you next week.